Hello, I'm Richard Hara, and this is Social Impact Live, a weekly conversation with members of the Columbia School of Social Work community. This week, I'm pleased to welcome to our award-winning program Dr. Courtney Cogburn and Dr. Desmond Patton, both on the faculty at the School of Social Work. Dr. Cogburn's work employs a transdisciplinary approach to examining racial inequalities in health. She is on the faculty of the Columbia Population Research Center and a faculty affiliate of the Center on African American Politics and Society and the Data Science Institute. She has received support for her work from the National Institutes of Health, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the Brown Institute for Media Innovation at the Columbia School of Journalism. Dr. Patton's research uses qualitative and computational data collection methods to examine the relationship between youth and gang violence and social media. He is the founding director of SafeLab, a member of the Data Science Institute, and a faculty affiliate of the Social Intervention Group at the Columbia School of Social Work. His work on so-called internet banging has been widely featured in the media, including the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, USA Today, NPR, ABC News and Nature, and was also cited in a brief submitted to the Supreme Court for a case concerning the interpretation of threats on social media. Professor Cogburn and Professor Patton, welcome to Social Impact Live.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's great to have you here today to talk about how new media and technology are changing the nature of social work research and practice. In order to keep pace with these changes, you've developed a new course of study here at CSSW called the Emerging Technology, Media, and Society minor for students in our master's program. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about this minor and all that it entails. But before we do so, if you could share with me a little bit about how you came to connect to these particular issues in a more individual and personal way, if that's okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think Desmond and I have, on separate paths, been working on working in technology for quite some time. And my work has involved kind of media and narrative as well. And we have had, since we've been working together here at the Columbia School of Social Work, have had our eyes open for how we might do something together. But I think it started just to make sense that we were among few social workers working in the space that we wanted to think about ways to create an infrastructure that would help support our different projects, but also integrate more of our students into becoming substantive players in this space.
And I think by virtue of us being in tech spaces as social workers, we realized that there was an absence of us in terms of our thinking, in terms of our practice, how we conceptualize ethics and frameworks, and we really wanted to fill that gap.
Yeah, I mean, there are times when I've been in meetings and I'm thinking, holy moly, we need a social worker at this table. Not just me, someone
Right.
else too. Or the people on the tech side may say, if only we had someone who could help us understand our client base and what they're going through and why they're posting these vitriolic messages. I'm like, that's a social worker, and I'm screaming. So there's lots of ways in which we've seen that gap.
Yeah, coming into the program, I was thinking, we're so intimidated by tech and everything else,
It can be,
and we're all reacting to it, right? And it's interesting that maybe we should flip it around, right? Maybe it's not, what is tech going to do for social work, but rather what can social work contribute to tech and media?
100%. I think one of the things that I have been wrestling with is this idea that there are non-tech people in tech. And the reality is we all consume tech. We are all a part of tech, and we should all be contributing to tech. And so we really have to eradicate this thinking that you have to be a data scientist or engineer in order to contribute.
And not can contribute, but construct,
Develop.
utilize,
Yeah.
develop, critique. The students who are taking the course that we're teaching with Jacqueline Sawyer this fall, we're really pushing them to say, you already have a skill set and knowledge base necessary to critique technology and how it's being used in society. You don't necessarily need to know how to code. You don't necessarily need to know all of the technical underpinnings of this particular app. You have something to say because it's interfacing with society. It's interfacing with human beings and human behavior that have implications that are social work perspective are important to apply to.
And even yesterday, we watched a student in class kind of struggle with not feeling like they had enough knowledge to be a part of the conversation, and that was the prime example of
Yeah.
of where we need to be. Is that no, you as a social worker are ripe for these types of conversations.
Yeah, you already need to know. There's more. We'll keep adding to it, but you
Yeah.
already know a lot. You're
Right.
already bringing a lot to the conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly technology isn't a new issue, right? I mean, I worked in an agency, and we used to do, for example, sort of telephone calls, right, to clients and so on, that hopefully had a therapeutic impact. And I mean, now you've got therapists who have their own sort of web programs or things like that, and so on. So, but it's more than that, right? I mean, we're sort of, it seems like we're entering a kind of digital era.
Yeah.
Right, and so what does that look like? I mean, it's beyond just chat rooms and things. I mean, what does it look like to you as far as this technology piece and social work practice?
I mean, I think so. You're making 2 points, right? So there's how social workers might use technology in their practice, right? If you're going to use some kind of virtual portal to meet with a client who's more rural and you're in an urban setting, but they can't afford to come in, and you're able to still meet with them. That's sort of an integration of technology into your practice.
Right.
But we're also arguing that when we're thinking about bias in AI, surveillance of vulnerable communities, how we're hiring and determining housing based on facial features and proportions, which is actually happening, right? Social workers play an important role in that discourse as well, so it's a two-way street. But there's all sorts of technologies that are merging, like using artificial intelligence to surveil communities, virtual environments where you can be with hundreds of people in a virtual world who are all over the world and be in a virtual space at the exact same time. But we can also track your movements and behavior in that virtual space, and that data can be saved, right? There's all sorts of technologies that I think are important to consider.
And I think what we have to move beyond as social workers is that there really are no boundaries for the ways in which we engage these spaces, right? I think when I'm in these conversations with social workers, we tend to move towards the practice space or towards the clinical space, and that's fine. I think that there's a lot to be said around how we protect data when we're in telehealth spaces. But what Courtney is really trying to underscore, I think is really important, is that there is so much happening around us that we need to be in conversation with, and so we should really be opening up our minds and hearts to being a part of those conversations in really rigorous ways.
So let me get this straight. So you're saying that maybe by focusing too much on creating this clinical space, we're missing another component of social relations that maybe, for example, has to do with more social justice issues and so on?
I think that we have relegated ourselves to a particular space that we are comfortable with. I think what Courtney and I are pushing through our new lab, the JET lab, and our new minor is that you need to get uncomfortable in this space.
Right.
You need to be uncomfortable with the things you don't know and to just join the conversation.
Okay. Well, so could you give me some examples, either from some of the current work that you're doing, the projects that you're involved with, and maybe the lab that you've created as well?
Yeah, so I direct the Safe Lab, and for the past 6 years now, we have been trying to understand the role of social media in gun violence prevention, and we use artificial intelligence, in particular machine learning and computer vision, to understand pathways to aggression online. The reality is the gold standard techniques in data science just don't work in this space. They failed time and time again, and we work with the most brilliant minds in data science here at Columbia. But when we went to our social work roots, when we brought in community members, folks who have lived experiences around gun violence, who could help us translate and interpret context, then our accuracy improved greatly. And again, that was just a social work skill. It wasn't something that was special. It was something that I learned in my MSW program in Michigan.
Yeah, I think really honestly, some of Desmond's work is really some of the most clear examples of how social work can fundamentally change tech, and how emerging technologies are fundamentally a social justice issue. So to put it in another way, data science, the machine learning approach has an algorithm for analyzing language. And that algorithm did not work in the communities where Desmond was working, and it didn't work until they brought community members into that space to start changing the algorithm, right? And that they had an expertise that was above and beyond how do you create an algorithm? They had an expertise in their own lives, and that's fundamentally a social work principle.
Yeah. No, I think AI sort of got to the next level when it sort of abandoned this top-down approach and sort of coming up with these rules, and rather sort of built from the experience of all of these different sources of information, right? That would sort of build to a greater understanding and creating these algorithms. So what is it that, for example, AI is going to do to help social work practice? I hate to sound like, that's why AI is here, but is there a use for AI? I mean, are we going to be using AI as a sort of diagnostic tool, or sort of keeping track of what's going on in communities? I have to say, we've got a lot of issues now, right, about big tech and data privacy and so on. So how does that affect what you're doing?
So I really think that we should take a step back and think about the problems and questions that we're trying to address. And not every problem or question needs a tech solution. So I think that a social work approach is to say, well, what is the problem? What are we listening to from communities? And should we involve tech or not? And that should be a part of the inputs when making a decision around to involve tech. So I don't think that we should jump to the conclusions that artificial intelligence is going to save us. However, there are some spaces and places where AI could be useful. AI is being used in suicide prevention, right? And so we are learning a lot from the communications, the images, the conversations that are being had on social media, and folks are using artificial intelligence to better understand that language and to predict when someone might have suicidal ideation. So that's an example of where you can leverage artificial intelligence for good, and then you can work with social workers who have expertise in that space to help disseminate some targeted interventions as well.
Okay, great. And in terms of specific technology like virtual reality, I mean, what are the possibilities there that you're seeing?
I think there's a lot of possibilities. So first I'll say that when I started working in virtual reality, I'd never used virtual reality to give people a sense of what you don't need to bring to the table to actually start working in the space. Strategic collaborations may be a wonderful way, right, to get started, which is what I did. I'm using virtual reality to help people engage complex social issues that they may be personally removed from. And by putting them into those circumstances from a first-person point of view, trying to find ways to help them better engage social issues like structural racism. That's really based on the argument that you can't effectively solve a problem like structural racism if you don't actually understand the problem you're trying to solve. In my work, I see a lot of discourse around individual bias, empathy, individual feelings, individual experiences with being mistreated, not policies, systems, structures that are producing these patterns. So I'm using virtual reality to help people understand systems and structures that they may be blind to or not fully get and understand by putting them into it and helping them engage it in a way that they may not be able to do otherwise. But I think there's so much potential for understanding interpersonal dynamics, for understanding patient-client dynamics. And again, the contribution of social work is not just how do we use it, it's also how do we understand it, critique it, unpack it, hold it accountable as well.
And just a really quick point, Courtney is fairly new to virtual reality, but she is one of the most well-known people in virtual reality. So I think that says a lot about the tech work that she's doing, but I think what also makes Courtney stand out from the rest is how she forms teams, the types of conversations that she's willing to have and engage in, the difficult conversations that she's willing to embrace through virtual reality. I think it's very new and exciting. And so I think that is something that is unique from a social work perspective that Courtney has brought to virtual reality.
When we come to the tech, it is not about the tech.
Right.
It is about the problem we're trying to address. That always leads the communities we're trying to serve and help. It is not about doing something cool in virtual reality. Which so starting at that point puts us in a completely different place. We're not trying to use cool tech. We're trying to think about implications of tech for the communities that we're trying to serve and support.
And to work in collaboration.
Absolutely.
So it's not the tech, it's not the policy. It's how people work together, right? That social work brings to the table.
100%.
So we have some time yet, and I want to bring in the new minor that you've developed here. I just want to remind our audience as well that If you have questions, please type them in, and our moderator will relay them to us so we can use them during our question and answer period. Okay, so this new minor, what's it called? How's it work?
It is Emerging Technology, Media, and Society.
Okay.
And it started from multiple vantage points. So Courtney and I had long-standing having conversations around the need for social workers to be brought into the 21st century around technology and how we can impart some of the things that we've been learning in our labs in this space. And then in addition, about a year and a half ago, I received a collaboratory grant to partner with Data Science Institute to create a new course around coding for social workers. And so we decided to marry those two things and to develop this new minor.
Yeah, and I think what we started to learn that, one, we have students on our team who are already engaged in this work. Students we've encountered who have been doing this work outside of social work, have been working in media and tech outside of the space, and have just been delighted that they're having an opportunity to marry their interests in a more significant way. So the minor will involve a core course that takes place, more of a survey course that happens in the fall, and then there will be a number of electives that they have to complete over the course of a year. Those electives might be a Python coding class, it may be a narrative storytelling for social justice course, it may be a design thinking and human rights course. So there's a range of courses that will be in social work that are still being developed and approved, and then courses that we've identified from around the university that meet this broad framework for the minor.
I think one thing that we realized is that I have assumed that our students, 22, 23 years old, know a lot about technology, and that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of language, there's a lot of backstory that is just not part of the conversation. And so this intro course has been a really nice survey of what is AI, what is machine learning, what is algorithmic bias. And these are things that social workers are engaged in day to day in their conversation in the community and with clients, but haven't used that language to talk about it.
Okay.
And one thing we've, just quickly, Richard, one thing we've been so excited about in class is that we've had so many people who work in tech, who have been critiquing tech from various bases, who have come to our class either in person or by Zoom, who are experts in their own right in different areas, who are directly sharing their perspectives and experiences with their students. So just yesterday we had Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who wrote Race After Technologies, a professor at Princeton, who came to the class and spoke and engaged them in critical discourse. Bruce Lincoln, who's one of the co-founders of Silicon Harlem, who's really thinking about the integration of tech into Harlem communities. It's such a unique opportunity for our students to engage with these figures and really get a sense of what's happening broadly in this space.
And that's really the power of being at Columbia and in New York City, is that we can have such a pool of people to come to our school, to come to our classes, but our students can also go to these different spaces as well. So we have a planned meeting with Justin from our labs coming up in November, where our students can actually go out to Brooklyn and hang out in this new virtual reality space.
Yeah, so I see two wonderful aspects of this. First, there's what I think you've been involved with transdisciplinary, right, kind of work, both across our university and scholars in the field. And at the same time, there's a community connection, right? And to be able, as social workers and social work students, to bridge and to bring together these different communities, stakeholders, and so on, I think, that's the promise of a social work degree, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, social work is inherently transdisciplinary.
Yeah.
Right? We're not a discipline, and we pull from so many different perspectives to integrate. We take on really difficult problems, and so that's what we do well. We're just leveraging what social work already is, what social work already does, and trying to apply it in new and interesting ways.
Okay, well, it sounds wonderful. I think we've got some questions from the audience to address. Have you seen virtual reality social work for exposure therapy to address fears such as fears of flying, fear of water, etc.? More clinical?
Yeah, I have. I've seen there's some work that's happening out of USC, for instance, where they're working with vets around post-traumatic stress disorder, and putting people back into spaces and experiences that trigger them, and helping them sort of engage using sort of a cognitive behavioral approach. But I also recently met some vets, disabled vets, who were talking about having problems with that approach and wondering if that's the way to go. So I think there's some possibilities that maybe there's still some room to grow.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can use it to help give people an experience, right, and maybe build empathy to address some issues that maybe have more structural implications, but at the same time we have to be careful, right? It's
Right.
not a fit for everyone, as you
Right.
said, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's not meant to solve every problem,
Yeah.
and so
It's
on.
not a magic pill, right?
Mm.
And so this is part of what I push against in virtual reality spaces, that you have the virtual reality experience, but what do you do with people when they come out of the headset? What information they have? What types of conversation are they having? What types of curriculum are they engaging? I think that's an important complementary piece of it's not just the tech itself, it's
Yeah.
what goes with it.
And what do you do afterwards? And it's not just an individual thing, it's also what do I do out there in my community?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. Next question. My question is for both guests as well. What are some topics you'd love to see social work students, researchers tackle in the tech space? Can you suggest 2 or 3 PhD research topics? Oh, okay. Someone's, yeah.
That's cheating.
Yeah.
I think that there is a continued need to think about algorithmic bias in ethics, but to really to blow up this idea of what ethics are. I think that what I've heard in this space is that it's really about bias in the algorithms, but we are omitting the bias that we have inherently in a white supremacist culture, and I think that we really have to start addressing the things that we're bringing to tech in really real ways. And it's not tech, it's not the instrument that's the problem, it is us. And so I think that we really need to start to tackle that in very rigorous ways.
I think I would add that I would like to see more work that not only targets the client, but also targets the systems that serve or not serve so well our clients. So what do we do? Often we might prepare someone who's coming out of prison to engage these systems and how to interview and apply for a job. How do you engage the people who are placed in the position to hire them or not?
Right.
How do you engage the people who are in charge of housing, funding, policy decisions on that end? So I think we need to engage, social workers need to engage not only our service of clients, but also the systems and people who will control those systems that become impediments for and create structural barriers for our clients.
And I think one of the things we really need to contend with is accessibility to this space and the workforce that's going to be impacted by this space. What I'm really concerned about is that there are going to be so many jobs that are displaced by artificial intelligence, and we're not prepared on a vast array of spaces. And as social workers, we're going to be the ones that are responding to it, and yet we have no response. And this is coming. And so I think that we really need to start doing some research now to prepare for how to train people so that we can prevent some of these things from happening.
Any ideas about what that response would look like?
Well, first, I think we just need to open the door in terms of accessibility to this space. Like with web pages, in 1997, only a few folks could do web pages, and they were paid lots of money. Now anyone can just pay $100 and develop a web page.
Right.
The same thing is happening with artificial intelligence. We need to start to get people who can apply AI to various spaces, places, and systems. And so we need to blow up this idea that you need to be an engineer in order to be a part of the AI workspace.
We are just barely tapping into what's possible
Yeah.
with these technologies because you haven't engaged people who didn't develop the technology,
Precisely.
right? So only the people who've developed the technology have imagined applications for that technology. So part of what we're arguing is like, what happens when you explain to a social worker very clearly what the technology is? What might they have to say about that? How might they apply it? One of the most interesting things I've just seen is an individual who's blind, who's modified the guiding cane to give haptic feedback, to give map information, and integrated technologies into this cane because it's coming from the perspective of someone who lives that experience.
Right.
No one else would have imagined that solution until this person had access to think about how to apply these
Right.
technologies. So we're trying to open the floodgates and bring as many people in as possible.
Yeah, I guess it's social work's ability, right, to give voice to people's experience that often aren't heard, right? So in different spaces. So I think that's obviously something that we want to continue it, but it's intimidating, right? I mean, I'm listening to AI and I'm thinking that you need supercomputers to do that kind of stuff and, self-driving cars of the future and all that kind of thing. But AI can have a much more sort of down to earth and everyday connection to
and
our
I think
lives.
that's part of the design, right?
Yeah.
Is to create a space that has been so distant that you think that you aren't a part of it, when in reality we are already a part of it. The way in which this whole video is happening now, there is some AI system that is helping to power a lot of things that are going on right now. So I think we have to blow up the language and then make it more accessible for everybody.
Okay. And, well, it's an intense topic, and I'd love to pursue it some more, but
okay.
we'll see if we have some more questions here from the audience. If you were hired by Facebook or Instagram at a high level to address user well-being, what is the first thing you would change?
Well, I do this now, so I'm a consultant at
Oh,
Facebook.
okay.
I've been there for a year. And one of the things I really need to say is that, I work with some great colleagues at Facebook that are really passionate about social justice and are really trying to make change. It's when you move up the ladder that there's immense change. There's this culture around breaking things and moving really quickly, and I think that we should actually slow things down and think critically about the application of these tools. And I think had we thought about the implications of a lot of these tools, then we wouldn't be where we are today. And so I think that there needs to be a different culture of where, breaking things to get a bigger buck is not going to be the thing that actually creates a more healthy society.
Right. And just quickly, I would add that I think in that position, and I've been in those roles as well, it's not just about protecting the user, it's also holding the system and organization accountable. And often social workers tend to think about protecting the person over here. We also have to constantly come back to, how do I hold this organization, their systems, their policies, their cultures accountable for the threat they're producing to the user.
So if we're not working for them, how do we hold them accountable? What are the things that we
I
might
think
do?
Using social media, collective organizing, tried and true advocacy and activism efforts matter, and we need to develop basic fluency in what's actually happening, what's going on, not feel removed from it, that's happening over there. As Desmond has been stating, it's integrated, it's all around us, it's already happening. Major decisions are being made on our behalf and for our society that will fundamentally change who we are and how we function, and in some ways will make the most vulnerable even more vulnerable than they already are. Will racism, sexism, etc. on steroids with some of these systems. And so we really can't afford to not have social workers involved and then use the tools that we already have that work quite effectively in organizing, advocacy, disruption, pushing back. We need to employ all of that.
And facilitating conversations, right?
And facilitating conversations.
At the
It's
table,
so
at the
critical.
table. Can technology and data science be used to influence more people-oriented social welfare policy?
I think so. One of the things that I think is really important about a data science approach is that it can elucidate patterns in larger data that may currently be unheard of or not discussed because the traditional methods of using surveys may not get at some of the root causes of problems. What I really appreciate about social media and data science is that we get to see multiple selves. We get to see multiple identities, multiple ways of thinking and knowing, and we can then harness that to really get at the root of how people are thinking about an issue. And I think that there's a big entry point for social welfare policy in that space.
Okay.
Yes, I agree. I won't go into a longer answer. Yes.
Well, yeah.
There's
No one
lots
has a monopoly, right?
There's
on
lots of
knowledge.
possibility.
Yeah.
I think
Different-
the policy question is around helping people understand social problems that they don't currently understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you understand root causes of mass incarceration? If you don't, you're going to come to solutions that have nothing to do with
Exactly.
the actual causes of mass incarceration. So yes, I think technology can be used in a number of ways to help support better thinking, understanding of the problem, so that we get to better policies and solutions.
sources of data, et cetera, and so on to consider. So, wonderful. Do you have any tools for broaching this subject with tech leadership who might not consider this conversation a priority? I mean, how do you get the foot in the door, so to speak?
A whole workshop on that. I have generally found that once people understand what social work is, they're very receptive to it because they're grappling with at least the priority of not causing damage to their company by something that they do and choose to do. That's like low bar priority. Others actually express interest in doing good. social justice, social impact. They have no idea how to actually do that, though. They don't have anyone on their team who does the for good portion of that. So I have found people to be quite receptive, at least on the surface.
I think that's clutch in terms of understanding the language that maps
That they
really
understand,
well
that it
into the
translates.
social work that translates for us. But we have the answers, and we can easily be in those conversations and provide frameworks and practices and thoughts and ideas, whereas most of those conversations are very surface. And so I think finding where you fit in is a really great entry point.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, I mean, I think the default is to consider engineers are creating the technology, so how do we help engineering become
Right.
more humanist, as opposed to maybe engineers are not the people you want
Yes.
in isolation addressing humanist problems. Maybe you need humanist, social justice, community-based people working in collaboration about
Folks,
that.
save that, underscore that, highlight that. That's a
true.
really important point.
You know, in the core engineering curriculum does not substantively address human behavior, does not substantively address complex social issues. So why would they be in a position to develop solution to those really complicated problems? You need people who are really grounded in the complexities of human behavior, society, oppression, etc. They need to be core to technology solutions and
100%.
At the end of the day, we're all people. So that concludes today's episode. We'll be joined next week by Columbia School of Social Work faculty member Richard Beck on the need for therapists to seek self-care. So I hope to see you then. Thanks and have a great week.